Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Frank Marotta. And like myself, he grew up in the Queens neighborhood called Corona. So welcome, Frank. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I definitely want to get into the book, but I thought we'd start just talking about the old days in Corona. So I think I have maybe 3 or 4 years on you.
Okay.
And I didn't actually grow up in Corona, but I did because that's where my uncles and my grandmother lived. So, we spent every Sunday at grandma's house and all of that. So
Absolutely.
uh so um now you in the pre-interview you said you were up the heights by the Lemon Ice King, right?
Correct.
And so where were you, on Corona Avenue, or you crossed Corona
Actually,
Avenue?
actually, I was 52nd Avenue between 103rd Street and Corona Avenue.
Okay.
So I was actually the block. I guess you would call it south of let's see, south actually west of the Lemon Ice King. I was on the corner of the Lemon Ice King.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
I was, you said you were on you were 4 floors up, and I'm trying to place that building and I can't place it. I mean, I know the area so well, because I used to, if you know Frank's Luncheonette, that was on 108th Street.
Vaguely, vaguely.
It was across from there was a bar across the street, and there was the Precision Place right
Uh,
there.
Precision Place was on the corner. Was it on the corner?
Precision Place was kind of, yeah, it was on the corner and went like halfway down the block.
Okay.
And then Frank's was there, and I
Okay.
worked there. I guess when you were probably maybe 8, 9, or 10, I worked there during the fair years, 64 and 65.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And as my cousin Lou used to say when he came in, let me have a soda, jerk.
Yeah. So I got you. I got you. Absolutely. Yeah.
uh, and I used to, when I would take the bus from Flushing, I used to take the 58
Absolutely.
and get off right in front of actually, the Lemon Ice King was there, and I think there was like a department store on that.
Well,
Where the bus stopped.
on that corner was a department store called the Four Gs. Actually,
Yes, yes.
that's where we and it's an ironic thing that I remember on that corner too. There was a kind of an intro spot before you got into the actual department store, and it was like an alcove. And
Yes.
it was an echo in there, and believe it or not, the doo-wop groups from the '50s used to sing in there. So that was very exciting as a kid to hear all those doo-wop groups sing up on the corner. Right, I had a free show almost every night there. It was great.
And it's quite possible that my brother was up there singing one day. My brother's he's 75 now,
Okay.
but he always hung out in Corona. In fact, um, you mentioned the in the book you mentioned Rosie, the Queen of Corona. Well, my cousins all knew Rosie.
Everybody knew a Rosie, but unfortunately, the true story about that song wasn't too pleasant on the minds of everybody from Corona. It was a weird story that Paul Simon had told about that Rosie was actually a man. So that's kind of a convoluted story, but it's a long story. We don't want to get into it right now, but you could get my gist. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, that's why I guess he was the
Yeah.
Queen of Corona.
Well, everybody, a lot of the mothers were called Queens of Corona, and my mother obviously was, a Queen of Corona, but all our mothers came from the same mold, so we kind of grew up in the same atmosphere and same morals and scruples and all that stuff. So it was a big family years ago, and it was just very comfortable to grow up in that environment.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about that because we obviously have similar stories, but yeah, and you touch on it a little bit in the book. What was it like to grow up as an Italian American boy in Corona?
Well, like I said, the easiest way that I say it is that I thought the whole world was Italian, and until I was 14 and went to high school, I thought everybody was Italian. And then I got a culture shock when I went into Newtown High School back in 1968 and got my first experience of different cultures and different nationalities. And lo and behold, everybody wasn't Italian, but just growing up in that Italian close-knit family environment, it stays with you, you know, for a long time. And like I said, I was 12 or 13 years old. I thought everybody was Italian.
And
The way they dressed, the way they looked, the way they spoke, you know. And
that's
the
funny
best was,
because I was a little bit different because I actually lived in College Point.
oh,
So
okay,
in
sure,
my school, you know, I always say I had the German kids and the Irish kids, and you know, it wasn't everybody just wasn't Italian. But then, you know, when I go into Corona, you know, the whole block was Italian, and the old ladies with the black dresses,
oh, I was going to
uh,
say, sure, yeah,
and
yeah.
the 3-day funerals and guiders and all
Oh,
of that stuff.
absolutely, yep, yep, yep.
Um,
We did it all, yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's amazing
so
how today they do only one day, and we had to suffer through 3 days, you know. And it was,
the only thing I remember about that was I guess good, in the sense that, you know, like you, I mean, we lived a block and a half from Guidus,
right,
and you know, our family was so big, and you could, you know, the yard is behind me there. So if it was a summer funeral, everybody was in the backyard. If it was a winter funeral, everybody was in the house.
wow.
But they used to get the chairs from Guidus. My uncles
Oh,
would
did you?
collect, they collect the
Yeah,
chairs, you know, 10, 20, whatever chairs that they needed, because Guido that was like family to everybody.
of course, and you didn't have to pay for them either.
Yeah. Or if you
Yeah,
did, it was, you know, it was a good deal. But I remember going there in the afternoon, or early morning, whatever it was. I guess afternoon. And then you had the 2-hour break,
yes,
and you go home and have the big Italian feast.
and go back to mourn. Yeah,
Right, exactly.
yeah. It was 2 to 5. It was actually, I tell you exactly, it was 2 to 5 and 7 to 10. So
That's right. That's right.
that's
Yeah.
what exactly it was. Yeah. Oh, sure. I remember all those days. Yeah. Yeah. I just actually reconnected with one of the heir apparents to that great family. Eddie Jr. now runs Guided's Funeral Home, and he's like the son of the grandfather of the uncle of the grandfather. I mean, it came all the way down to him. And I had a nice talk with him. I told him about the book, and he's very, very excited about the book. And actually, you know, there is the chapter when my father passed, and Guide has played a very, very integral role in the passing of my father, unfortunately. And I explained that to him, and it was, you know, a pretty nice reunion after all these years. And I told him, I says, our family knows each other for 60 years. It's crazy, you know. So
Yeah.
he's the so now we knew his great uncles. So that's how far that tradition goes back to Guiders, you know.
No, the same thing here. And you know, it's the same thing with St. Leo's. Now, my parents got married in St. Leo's, probably about 3 years before your parents. They got married in
1947. Yeah.
Yeah, and my parents were married in 1944. And I actually have a movie of my parents'
Wow,
wedding.
that's excellent.
You know, it's
8
not long.
millimeter.
It's about 2 minutes, but we do have it.
That is so funny. That is so funny. Yeah, there is a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine that I grew up with from Corona. He always says that when he sees his aunt's wedding album, I'm the altar boy.
Really?
And
Oh, that's cool.
this is like, yeah, it's like 60 years ago that I was the altar boy in his aunt's wedding. Yeah, they're married like 55 years. So isn't that funny? Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
That is funny. And now,
Yeah, I was an altar boy. Like I said, I think I mentioned in a book, the little chapel on 52nd Avenue. I was an altar boy there for many years as a 10-year-old, and it was the interesting part about that little chapel is that the altar boy history was very interesting. So what we did was the boys on the block, everybody was related. So you had different families that had brothers. So the tradition was each brother group used to serve the mass, and we were all related. It was crazy.
oh
Um,
wow,
yeah, it was.
that's something.
And then I had the the pleasure of ringing the 8:30 Italian mass bell every every Sunday morning up in the bell tower. It was cool. As a 10-year-old to ring that bell was like really, really cool, you know.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I bet it was. And you
yeah,
know, you know, those, unfortunately, those years are gone. I mean, you know, when I was reading the book, some of the best years of your life, because my aunt and uncle for a time, both worked, probably, you probably were very, very young at the time, but they both worked at Leonard's Bakery.
Sure.
My uncle was a baker.
Okay.
My aunt was one of the counter ladies or women.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And my aunt was a pisser. My aunt was like, everybody has an Aunt Mary, and my Aunt Mary
Oh,
was
without a doubt.
one of the funniest Aunt Marys that you could ever have, especially working there behind the counter.
Yeah.
And
if you don't mind me interrupting, I think I heard that in one of your podcasts. You told a story about a mob guy that came in and she was disrespectful to him.
Profaci.
Yeah, that was a great story. That was a great. I listened to that podcast. It was excellent. It was really cool. Yeah, that was a great story.
Yeah, and
great story.
When she told this story, it was just like,
oh my God, yeah.
So
everybody had an Aunt Mary. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And then right by what was the public school on, I guess it was it 43rd Avenue, where the hot dog guy was?
Oh, that was IS 16 or PS 16.
PS 16. Well, my Aunt Agnes owned the beauty parlor right on the corner.
Oh, sure. That was where there was an apartment building there, wasn't there?
Yes, that's right. Yep. Yeah.
Yes, Linden Park. Yes, we spent a lot of time in Linden Park there too. A lot of the guys used to come from the Heights to go down to Linden Park, and we played a lot of softball and basketball there. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, there was the park. Yeah.
Yeah, and that used to be a lake years ago. Do you ever see the history of that park? That was a lake in there.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, if you look up Linden Park, that whole area was a man-made lake. So they turned it into a park, which was pretty interesting.
Oh wow, I never knew that.
Yeah,
that is really interesting.
If you see old photos of Corona, Linden Park was a man-made lake there. Yeah.
So how many times did you go to the World's Fair growing up?
Oh geez, that was
and did you sneak in?
Oh, well, that's what I was getting to. Yeah, Corona guys always had an angle of doing something, and our angle was, in the middle of the night, we used to dig holes under the fence with shovels, and then the next morning just go right under the hole of the fence and go right in. And I remember the cops, they were called Pinkertons at the time, and the Pinkerton cops always used to, be running after us, but we always got the last laugh because we actually snuck in. I think the admission was $250. Back in 1964.
It was cheap. Yeah.
Yeah, and we that's what put Corona on the map. That was the World's Fair was our backyard, and that's what put Corona finally on the map. And my mother, being in Corona all her life, told me the stories in the 1939 World's Fair. And one story that sticks out was a crazy story. In 1939, was it Theodore Roosevelt? I guess was the president at that time. And that was the first television broadcast came from Corona, New York. It was 1939. And he opened up the 1939 World's Fair. And that particular day, I don't know how the story goes. I think it was his wife was feeling sick at the time of the speech. And they brought her up the Heights to a pharmacy. And the pharmacist gave her some medicine. And it was a big thing in Corona that the president's wife was up the Heights, and that was that corner pharmacy. It was right across the street from the Lemon Ice King, and the president's wife, the United States, was in Corona for at the pharmacy. Ain't that crazy?
Oh, that is crazy. Now my dad worked at the World's Fair.
Oh wow.
I don't know what he did. He eventually later he was a photographer for the Daily News for
nice. Oh, that's a great position.
For 40 years. So you probably saw his photos growing up, in
absolutely.
the paper.
Absolutely.
It's funny about the Corona kids always having an angle. Now, so you probably went to Newtown.
Yes.
With my cousin Kathy, because she's
Nicoletti?
about your age. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I know Kathy well. Yes, I know Kathy. Yes.
Small world, right?
she knows who I am. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you said, no matter where you go, you meet somebody from Corona, and it's like like I still have Corona childhood friends that I'm still friends with over 55 years. It's crazy, you know. And every time we get together, my wife always says, she's from Elmhurst, and she says, I always thought I knew all the Corona stories, but they just keep on coming, and they don't end. I says, well, there's always a Corona story. Everybody has a Corona story, you know. And she always says that we have to hear another Corona story. I says, why not? They're so entertaining, you know.
They are,
So
like we said before, I
I
mean,
mean,
some of the most
they
entertaining days of my life were in
oh my
Corona.
God, oh my God, it's and just to think of the people, the celebrities that nobody knows that came out of Corona. It's you know, it was a really you know, it was a crazy time, and a lot of influential people came out of Corona. You know, people don't realize how many actors and, you know, professionals and athletes that came out of Corona. It's pretty astounding.
Well, yeah, my cousins, like it's they're 5, 6, 7 years older than me. And they knew Burt Young
Yes,
before he was Burt Young. You know,
absolutely. Yeah.
they used to hang around with him, and I think my cousin said that he used to work at Ruby's at one time, but I'm
Yes, he
not.
was. Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes, yes. Ruby's was the carpet place
the
that
carpet
everybody got
place.
their carpets
Yeah, that's
placed. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I mean, and you have that indelible mark in your head of that store on the corner in St.
Yeah,
Leo's over
and
here, and
yeah, and it
Camarades
was,
down the other block.
and it's funny because Ruby was a Jewish fellow,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
Marie Marie was Italian, obviously from Corona, and she always used to be smoking, sitting on a chair outside of Ruby's. That's how I remember Marie. And matter of fact, her mother lived, and we had a four-family house in Corona, and the front apartment was her mother lived in our apartment in the front of the in the front of our building, and we knew her for many years. But yeah, Ruby's was another iconic spot in Corona. Everybody bought their rugs from Ruby, you know.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with PhilItaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
Yeah, and then there was Needleman's.
Needleman's
Was
I
the
respe-
candy store by the church.
now that became Mr. Brown's. Did that become Mr. Brown's?
Probably.
Yes. Yeah.
I remember as
Needleman's.
Needleman's.
Yes. Yeah. So Mr. Brown's, you're talking maybe in the 60s.
Yeah, and I remember Needleman's late 50s, early 60s. So
Okay, there you
probably
go.
that was probably the same place. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, to your point too, people don't realize what a hub Corona was. And I always remember when they built the World's Fair, when they were building the World's Fair, before it was Flushing Meadow Park,
Right.
it was the Corona dump.
Correct. Right. I think I mentioned that in the book also.
You probably do. But I remember the family sitting around saying, "Oh boy, it was the Corona dump, and now it's Flushing Meadow Park."
And now it's a big museum.
Yeah. And and one of the great things about being in Corona, you could walk to the World's Fair, you could walk to Shea Stadium. I mean,
Oh,
it
you
was
walked all over, yeah.
and the train was right there to Manhattan, which
Absolutely. Yeah.
was really easy, and you had a movie theater there.
Yes. Every
which was-
Saturday afternoon was the Plaza Theater back down on
Mhm.
103rd Street and Roosevelt Avenue. Sure.
Yeah.
I think my mother used to give us 50 cents, and we used to go see 3 movies on a Saturday afternoon. It was great. 10, 12 kids from the area used to, just see the movies on a Saturday afternoon at the Plaza Theater. Yeah, great
Yeah.
memories of that too. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about the Italian feast, and you have an interesting story that you could tell so we get people to buy the book, and one of the
Yes.
stories I like. But when I was growing up, when I was young, up until maybe I was about, I want to say 9 or 10, before the ambulance corps was the ambulance corps and it was the beer garden, there used to be a feast on 48th Avenue.
That I didn't know. I don't remember that one.
Yeah, you're probably too young to remember that. But it was on that whole block.
Okay.
And I don't know if it was the same feast that you spoke about and they moved it, or if it was a completely different feast. But it was great because it was right outside the gate of the picture you see behind me was the
Right.
Zeppela guy every
Wow.
year.
Wow.
3 for a quarter.
Yeah. Now it's 8 for 10.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But tell us the story about your friends at the feast and the
Well, what happened was there was a particular person, I don't want to, mention his name, and a lot of people in Corona know who I'm speaking of. Had a very, very, very rough, kind of gruff reputation, and the backdrop of the reputation was that he was stealing from the church, and it was a no-no back in those days to do that. So we got wind of that. So we put our little heads together at the time. We were, 10, 11, 12 years old, maybe 13, the older guy. And we says, hey, you know what? I think we should send this guy a message. And one of the guys from our block was very interested in electronics, and he had a great knowledge of fireworks and electronics and whatever. So we came up with this plan that we're going to send him a message. So this guy that ran the feast ran the actual gambling booth. And the gambling booth was a little bit up the block there. And so our divisive plan was to set up a little explosion and to get this guy's attention. And it worked to perfection. So what we did was, during the day when nobody was around, we set a fuse up, about a 30-foot fuse by the tent, on the side of the tent. And then when the feast was booming, 10, 11 o'clock, we, unbeknownst to anyone else, we set this fuse, and we went back, we sat on the stoop, and within like 10 seconds, we hear this explosion, and it really worked out well. And this guy did get some shrapnel. I think he was hit with some of that explosive stuff, and nothing major. We weren't trying to kill him or anything, but just try to send a message that, hey, you're not doing the right thing here. And it was pretty successful. And the next day, he was telling people, whoever did this is going to pay the price, and he's going to find out who did it. And up until this day, he's passed away now, but he never found out, who those characters was that set that bomb that night.
leave it to the altar boys to.
That's correct. Leave it to the altar boys. That's a great line, a common line. Absolutely, leave it to the altar boys. Yeah. So that was one of the stories, and I think I also mentioned that my mom and dad had a meatball hero stand right in front of my house. And I think I mentioned in the book too, my mother fried 600 meatballs one night. So she was frying all day long. And to this day, if I see somebody that I haven't seen in 40, 50 years, they say, hey, I always remember your mother's meatballs. They were fantastic. And my mother sold meatball heroes. And as a big family growing up in Corona, from the profits of that feast, we went on our first vacation from the sales of those meatball heroes. It was pretty interesting. Yeah.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat.
Yeah.
And I'll be here in the air-conditioned kitchen frying eggplants, and you're even sweating, even with the air conditioner on. And then you think back to our aunts and our grandmothers and moms who were in these tiny little kitchens frying food all day.
Oh my God, with the
degrees.
aprons on. Yeah,
Yes.
with the aprons on. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when they, on top of the house dresses that they all wore, I think the next part of the clothing was they started the day with the aprons on, and it never came off until they went to sleep, because I always remember my grandmother lived across the hall. So we grew up with my grandparents, which was fantastic. And my grandmother, that's all she worried about is cooking, and if you weren't eating, there was something wrong with you. She's like, you feeling all right? Yeah. And then when I had kids and I brought my kids up to Corona, I was living in Jackson Heights at this time. I remember my kids used to come up those steps before the jackets came off. My grandmother had Italian bread with butter waiting for those kids to have bread and butter, because she wanted to see the kids eat before they took their jackets off. It was crazy.
Oh, that's funny. I used to love the hot Bellachicos with butter on it.
Oh my God. Yeah. 43rd Avenue and Junction Boulevard. Yeah.
Nothing like it. Oh boy. And now Aunt Mary lived across from Bellachicos for a while. So you would go there and that smell would just knock you out.
Oh
You
my
know,
God.
there
Yeah.
was nothing like the smell of Bella Chico's.
Yeah. People don't realize, and I found this out through some historical facts of Corona. Bella Chico was the first producer of Italian bread in New York City. Did you know that?
No,
Yeah.
wow.
So the Bella Chico family back in the 30s produced the first Italian bread in New York City. Yeah. I mean, don't quote me, but I did hear that on a historical level. So it could be right. I could be wrong too, but they were one of the top, yeah, um, bread makers. Yeah. And they
Now,
became, that bread sold nationally over the years. I think they sold the business in 1973, actually. They
wow,
sold
I
it
didn't
to,
realize it was that long ago. Wow.
yes, they sold it to a company in Queens Village, I think. That's where they sold it. Yeah. Yeah, Bella Chico was unbelievable bread.
It
Yeah.
was great. Now your mom and dad, where from Italy were they from?
My mom and dad was second generation. Um, so they both were born in the United States. My mother's parents came from Naples, in a town called Caserta.
Mhm.
That was in Naples, and a lot of people from Corona came from southern part of Italy. My father's parents, my father was an upstate guy, and his father came from Naples also, and it was a town called Limadola, and it was a mountainous town. And it was funny how he wound up in upstate New York because they were used to the mountains, and that's where they settled. And then I explain in the book how my mother took my father away from those country times upstate, and he became a real city slicker when he came down to Corona, and that changed his whole life.
So how did they meet? If he was from up there and she was here.
Well, again, I think I mentioned in the book it was a strange connection. You want to talk about a marriage that was set up, before these kids were actually adults. So it goes that my father's brother married my mother's father's sister. So believe it or not, my two grandparents were brother-in-laws before my mother and father ever met. So when they said, when these kids get older, we're going to try to hook them up, and they were successful. So that's how my mother and father met. So, they say Goombas years ago. They were Goombas before my mother and father were even born. Ain't that crazy?
Oh, that is,
So it
yeah.
was kind of, and the joke was my mother and father met in the bathtub when they were 3 years old. They used to give the kids baths in the bathtub. So it was a pretty interesting beginning for my mother and father. And they didn't go out with any other couples at that time. They were just kind of made for each other. And unfortunately, my father passed, like I mentioned in the book, at 50 years old. Was devastating for all of us.
We'll be right back.
Lafayette, we are here. The French history podcast for the American public by a Frenchman. Learn all about France's fascinating history, its great characters like Charlemagne, Joan of Arc, Louis XIV, or Napoleon, but also the great events that marked France, Europe, and sometimes the whole world. Lafayette, we're here. Available wherever you get your podcast or on LafayettePodcast.com. À bientôt.
Yeah, and I never got I never got the whole story about how my parents met. They both lived in Corona, obviously.
Wow.
But the big story is that my grandfather, my mom's father, used to call my father toute jacket, all jacket,
Awesome.
all jacket,
Oh, wow.
because
Wow. That's
he wore the zoot suit
all the time. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I just recently heard this from my cousin, of which I had never heard. One night, my father decided to stay out all night.
Oh, boy.
So you were talking 1942, 1943, whatever it was. And apparently, my cousin told me that, because they live with my grandparents, that my father got hell when he got home.
Wow.
And I guess my father was just not that much older than my mother, like a year and a half or something like that.
Okay.
But so let's talk about a little bit more about the book. Why'd you write the book?
You know, uh, what happened was I've always had this passion for writing, and I actually started this book about 20 years ago, and it was I wrote 2 chapters, and it was basically sitting, in my drawers for all those years. And I said, one day I'm going to complete this book. I don't know when, I don't know how. And when the pandemic came, that was my silver lining. So I just sat down, and I lost my part-time job on March 30th of the year of the pandemic. And I just sat down and said, okay, let's go to chapter 3. And it just rushed right out of me. And I just went from 1964 to 1984, and I wrote literally for 10 hours a day for 4 months straight. And that's how the book was created. So I wound up getting 19 chapters from the original 2 that I had. And yeah, so it was something that, has been inside of me all these years, and I just had to get it out. Um, and
Well, I was going to say it's a very personal story too. I
oh
mean,
my God.
you could, there's parts in it that I can relate to. So we have some things in common. My second wife, my current wife, she's Puerto Rican and
Oh wow! So I did just the
Sicilian.
reverse. I did the reverse.
Yeah, she's Puerto Rican and Sicilian. So.
Wow, that's a tough mix there.
You ain't
They
kidding.
said they come with the knife and the gun to the party. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
But like I was saying, it is it is a very personal story, and
Yes.
I'm sure it was tough to tell, but
Oh
did you
my
do
God.
it because you felt you had to get you had to get this out?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the bottom line is it's a book of survival, and it's a book of self-discovery and survival. And like I said, I unfortunately, my childhood was very dark, and all those scars followed me many, many, many years. And it kind of hampered my thought process, and my emotional process, and just my self-esteem wasn't there as a young child and as a teenager, and just all those emotional um, downsides, or tough beginnings, emotionally for me. I was, it was like I was inhibited, that I couldn't have the confidence to do a lot of things. And then it made me, along the way, make some not so favorable decisions that I had to live with. And when those decisions were made, I try to, go uh, through those times, and it was very difficult. And then, I was fortunate to be out on the other side now. So that's why I think that if the book could help one person, as far as survival goes, I think I did my job.
Yeah, and and I did get the impression from the tough times, but there was also love in there, especially from your
Oh yeah.
dad and your grandparents. So
Oh my God.
it's a good story too.
Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad. It's funny. I haven't had all my reviews are biased because I'm writing down I get emails, I get telephone calls, I get messages, constantly about the book, and I'm keeping track of them. And you're probably my first non-biased review of the book, and everybody that has gotten to me on their review, I know them all. So I kept on saying, okay, so if you didn't know me, was the book good? So they said, yeah, it was pretty good, So I'd like to, I'm keeping track of all my reviews. So, everybody says, I feel like I'm talking to you, during the book. It's amazing how the storytelling is just so on key, and it's so precise.
Well, yeah, and I think for those who from Corona who listen to it, or
Oh
out in
my
Hearst or
God. Yeah, I
Jackson
think,
Heights,
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
they could relate to a lot of it.
Yeah, that's what I say. I said it. It's a must read from anybody, from Corona. So, and even like without writing the book, when you talk about Corona, everybody had that same, tough love upbringing. You know what I mean? Because our parents my mother used to say, you see your friend across the street? I grew up with his father. So that's how close the neighborhood was, because our parents grew up with our friends' parents.
Yeah.
And it was like, there was no generation breakdown. In today's world, my kids now, it's a total different generation. But I feel that my parents' generation and our generation, it was basically the same. So there was no culture shock there. But the kids today, they just have a whole different outlook on life, and it's very hard to communicate with your kids today.
Well, yeah, and like you said, my dad, he had one. I guess Bill was his best friend growing up, who he later became a Supreme Court judge, and they were fast friends. I mean, until my dad passed away, they used to bowl together.
Wow. Did he come from Corona?
Yeah, yeah.
Was it? I know a lot of judges from Corona.
Well, Giacchio was.
Oh, sure.
One.
Yeah.
And
Phil Giacchio. Yeah.
Bill Giacchio.
Bill Giacchio.
But he actually, when Mary and I got married, we were both married before in the church, so we couldn't get married in the church. So we asked him if he would marry us, and he wouldn't do it because he didn't perform weddings, because he's a good Catholic. Now, there's another judge, Phil Chetta.
I know Phil Chetta, sure, absolutely,
right. Yeah. He married Marion and I.
That's interesting.
And he married us in the criminal courts building in Kew Gardens.
There you go. Wow.
and we were in there, and we were there for a while, and we were just talking about things. And
that is interesting.
My dad said, I guess we should go now. The judge has, and Phil said, they could wait. They're behind bars. They'll wait for me to get there.
Wow, that's funny. Yeah, that is so crazy. Actually, my mother was politically connected in Corona for many, many years. She was the recording secretary. I think it was District 34 Democratic Club up the Heights there. Mm-hmm. And my mother knew a lot. My mother knew all the judges, and Phil and Joe Lisa and all those guys.
I was just going to mention Joe Lisa. My dad was good friends with.
There was I think there was two Joe Lisas, father and son.
Father and son. Yeah.
Yeah. And then and then there was Ngolia also. Was Joe Ngolia was another judge from Corona. There was a lot of judges from Corona. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't know if was it LaFauci?
Could have been.
I don't know if he was from Corona, but he was. He must have been, because him and Bill were very close, and they were in the same courts.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I remember Bill Giacchio when he was a councilman in Corona.
Yes. Right.
Going way back, and then he became a civil court, and then he became Supreme Court.
Yeah, they did very well for themselves. They did very well for themselves.
Well, but that was instilled in them too, to work hard. I mean, my mom's brothers. I always tell people, I had 9 fathers and mothers.
Wow.
Because my aunts and uncles, every one of them were like a parent.
Of course.
And you did not disrespect them, not like today.
Of course. Oh my God.
You get one of those, right? But they would do anything for their nephews and nieces. Anything.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I used to love. My uncle eventually moved from Corona. 2 of my uncles moved from Corona to College Point. And my Uncle Tom, when I was about 10 or 11, he had the big old Pontiac or Chevy or Plymouth, whatever it was. And he used to let me sit on his lap and drive the College Point Causeway from College Point to Roosevelt Ave.
Oh boy. Wow. That's crazy.
And then he'd take over when we got to Roosevelt Avenue underneath the.
Were you sitting on his lap?
Sit on his lap, yeah. He'd work the pedals, and I'd steer. Don't tell your mother.
You don't tell your mother. No. Yeah, I know. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. Wow.
And the other thing that you always had to do, on the way to Corona was make sure you kiss your aunt.
Before you leave. Yep.
Before you leave.
Yeah. And make sure you go to the bathroom too.
Make sure you go to the bathroom. Right.
You got to go to the bathroom. Yeah. And today it's still in my mind. Every time I go out, I got to go to the bathroom before you go out. It's amazing how these things just stick with you. You know, they
Yeah.
don't go away. You know.
And trying to leave the house was another battle.
Oh, to say goodbye. Yeah.
Half hour.
Oh,
to get
yeah.
out
You
of
got to
the-
start. The line starts. Yeah, in about a half hour. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So well, this has been a lot of fun. Obviously, talking about Corona and
Absolutely.
everything. I see
Yeah.
the book behind you. So for everybody listening, what's the name of the book and where can they find
Okay.
it?
The name of the book is Alterations to a Life Jacket, and it's the subtitle is Tales of a Young Man's Survival. And like I said, it's a must read for Corona people, and the New York City Italian Queens flavor, I think, is pretty dominant in the book. And like I say to people, there's a whole chapter dedicated to Corona, chapter 2, and there's references throughout the book about Corona. And it's like, I use the terminology, it's not, what you know, it's who you know. And that followed me throughout my whole life too. And as far as those people helping me from Corona along this journey, and it was a very, very big Corona influence.
Yeah, no, and again, I had the exact same experiences. Well, thanks again. And for anybody listening, buy the
Yeah.
book. It's on Amazon.
Actually, before I leave, there's also a website for the book, and it's atalj.com. So it's atalj.com, and there's an interesting website that's dedicated to the entire book.
Oh, okay, great.
So you
Great.
could check that website, and like I said, I love for people to, our Italian people and people with our background would definitely enjoy this journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thanks again, Frank. Have a great day.
Same here, Bob, and thanks for having me.